Moving on to the next two important terms, trade and markets. Specialization only makes sense through if workers and other economic agents, such as businesses and nations, can use their income to purchase the other goods and services they need. In short, specialization requires trade. You do not have to know anything about electronics or sound systems to play music. You just buy an AirPod or Beats player, download the music, and listen. You do not have to know anything about textiles or the construction of sewing machines. If you need a jacket, you just buy the jacket and wear it. Instead of trying to acquire all the knowledge and skills involved in producing all of the goods and services that you wish to consume, the market allows you to learn specialized set of skills and then use the pay you receive, which we call income, to buy the goods and services you need or want. This is how our modern society has evolved into a strong economy. Many subjects are studied on various levels. Consider biology. For example, molecular biologists study the chemical compounds that make up living things. Cellular biologists study cells, which are made up of many chemical compounds and at the same time are themselves the building blocks of living organisms. Evolutionary biologists study the many varieties of animal and plants and how species change gradually over the centuries. Economics is also studied on various levels. We can study the decisions of individuals, households, or firms, or we can study the interaction of households and firms in markets for specific goods and services. Or we can study the opportunity of the economy as a whole, which is just the sum of the activities of all these decision makers in all these markets. The fields of economics is traditionally divided into two broad subfields. Microeconomics is the study of how households and firms make decisions and how they interact in specific markets, while macroeconomics is the study of economy-wide phenomena. A microeconomist may study the effects of rent control on housing in New York City, the impact of foreign competition on the US auto industry, or the effects of comps- sorry, compulsory school attendance on workers' earnings. A macroeconomist may study the effects of borrowing by the federal government, the changes over time in the economy's rate of unemployment, or alternative policies to raise growth, specifically economic growth, in national living standards. Microeconomics and macroeconomics are closely intertwined because changes in the overall economy arise from the decisions of millions of individuals. It is impossible to understand macroeconomic development without considering the associated microeconomic decisions. For example, a macroeconomist may study the effects of a cut in the federal income tax on the overall production of goods and services. To analyze this issue, he or she must consider how the tax cut affects the decisions of households about how much to spend on goods and services. Another important term is budget constraint framework, a term we will frequently use and encounter in this course. For most of us, the idea of scarcity and trade off is something we experience in a very real way when it comes to our knowledge, when it comes to our own budget constraints. Most of us have a limited amount of money to spend on the things we need and want. Another kind of budget constraint is time. For instance, as a student, you only have 24 hours in the day to study, eat, sleep, and check Facebook. An hour spent studying economics is an hour that can't be used for sleep or play or something else. As a result, you have to make choices, and every choice involves trade offs and opportunity cost, if you remember. In economics, a budget constraint refers to all possible combinations of goods that someone can afford, given the price of goods and the income, or in some cases, time we have to spend. Now, the law of diminishing marginal returns. The law of diminishing marginal returns is a theory in economics that predicts that after some optimal level of capacity is reached, adding an additional factor of production will actually result in smaller increase in outputs. For example, a factory employs workers to manufacture its products, and at some point the company operates at an optimal level. With all other production factors constant, adding an additional workers beyond this optimal level will result in less efficient operations. Rationality and self-interest. If you say that someone is behaving rationally, you probably mean that he or she is acting in a thoughtful way, clear head, as opposed its irrationality, which suggests that someone is acting emotionally or illogically. In the context of economics, the term rationality has a very specific meaning. It refers to an assumption that economists make about how people behave. Remember that this is the starting point of all economics. This is the initial and essential hypothesis. In the faces of scarcity, there simply aren't enough resources to satisfy all needs and wants. Charlie has only $10. He's hungry and he needs to get to work. What will he do? An economist predicts that Charlie will behave in a predictable, rational manner, balancing costs against benefits to arrive at an action that maximizes his personal happiness or utility. As a result, he will choose a certain number of burgers and certain number of bus tickets. Economists assume that people will make choices in their own self-interest. They will choose those things that provide the greatest personal benefit, and they will avoid or forego those that aren't as personally valuable and compelling. That's what we mean by the assumption of rationality. The assumption of rationality, also called the theory of rational behavior, is primarily a simplification that economists make in order to create a useful model of human decision making.